Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Papers podcast where we make sense of the medical education literature so you can make sense of your day. Today is our second methods consult. My name is Lara Varpio, and I'm going to try to help you lay bare the methods in our research madness. Today, we're going to take on thematic analysis. It is one of the building blocks of so many different approaches and methodologies to qualitative research. It really is a foundational piece. So we're going to spend a minute today, a minute or 20, having a quick review of what is thematic analysis and how we do this. So it's, again, because it's a building block, it's important for us to start with the recognition that thematic analysis is a way of doing data analysis and qualitative research. It's also an approach that is used within many different methodologies. So for instance, grounded theory or constructivist grounded theory engages in thematic analysis in a very specific kind of way. What we're going to talk about today is the art of doing thematic analysis, and specifically, we're going to talk about the thematic analysis approach as it has been written about by Braun and Clarke, because their book really is one of the most recent and honestly, one of my favorite articulations of thematic analysis because it's so clear. And that book, published in 2022, is called Thematic Analysis, A Practical Guide. And I can't recommend this book highly enough. It really is a handy step-by-step guide to thematic analysis. Now, as I was saying, thematic analysis is the work that a researcher does to construct themes in the data sets that they have. It is an analysis approach, and it can stand on its own as an independent approach. However, as we said, we've also seen it in many different methodologies. So when I talk about it today, I'm going to take it out of any specific methodology. So don't think of this as how to do thematic analysis in grounded theory. They have an approach. They take thematic analysis and do something specific with it. What I'm going to talk to you about today is thematic analysis in and of itself and how you can use it in your research. So to that end, though, in order for us to have this conversation, I have to echo back to our very first methods consult, because thematic analysis is an analysis approach for dealing and finding themes and data that's actually really flexible. What that means is that you can take thematic analysis and come to it from a post-positivist orientation. You can use thematic analysis and come to it from a constructivist or an interpretivist or social constructionist orientation. So depending on your paradigmatic orientation, you will be using thematic analysis in slightly different ways, and your goals of success, your markers for rigor, are going to look a little different. Now, today, I'm not going to talk to you about post-positivist thematic analysis. Instead, I'm going to take you to the other side of the house, and we're going to talk about thematic analysis in that constructivist space. The book with Braun and Clarke would call that big Q qualitative research. Don't worry if all of this is new to you. First, go listen to that first Papers podcast to get your foundational philosophy of science understanding, and then come back and you'll be right ready for us to start talking about how to do thematic analysis within that big Q side of the house. So, with that then said, let's start talking about thematic analysis. So let me give you the definition of thematic analysis as Braun and Clarke do in their book. They say, and I quote, "Thematic analysis is a method for developing, analyzing, and interpreting patterns across a qualitative data set, which involves systematic processes of coding to develop themes. Themes are the ultimate analytic purpose." End of quote. So, thematic analysis is a method for developing themes. And let's take a minute here just to have a quick pause to note that thematic analysis, and I'll probably start calling it TA at some point, is a data analysis method, not a methodology. A methodology is a theoretically and disciplinary informed and delineated way of doing research. So that's grounded theory, phenomenology, ethnography. Those are methodologies. They are conducted to serve a specific kind of research purpose. They come from specific disciplines that shape how you conduct studies. They frame the kinds of questions you can ask as well, the kinds of data you should collect, the kinds of analysis you should do. All right, that's a methodology. Thematic analysis, as we're talking about it today, That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about as TA as a methodology. TA doesn't frame your whole study. Thematic analysis is a method. If interviews and focus groups are a method for collecting data, then thematic analysis is a method for data analysis. You use this data analysis method to develop and analyze and interpret patterns in your data set. The end product then is the generation of themes. This is big Q thematic analysis that we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to talk about this work, this method on the big Q side. It is important, as I mentioned earlier, though, that this method is often part of bigger methodologies. So if you're going to take thematic analysis and do it in those bigger methodologies, make sure you do the reading to understand how to do the thematic analysis work according to those methodologies. So we're going to focus on the method today. What does that mean? So if we're going to do big Q thematic analysis, this actually has a specific name. It's called reflexive thematic analysis. And again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, this is all from Braun and Clarke. I really appreciate their descriptions. There are others, and those others are fine too. This is my favorite, so that's what we're going to talk about. How do they define reflexive thematic analysis? Reflexive thematic analysis foregrounds the active role of the researcher in coding and theme development, and the importance of the researcher reflecting on their assumptions and their practices and how those assumptions and practices shape their data analysis. So if you're familiar with your paradigms, you just listened to the last methods consult, this is really constructivist, right? The point of TA is to give you a method to analyze your data that ends with themes. Perfect. It recognizes who you are. Great. So how on earth are we actually going to do this work? Not a problem. In order to frame this, what I want you to do is think of the data set you have in your hands, right? So any data set that you're going to be working with, the first thing that we need to be thinking about when we start doing thematic analysis is that before we get into anything, we have to start with some moments of reflexivity. What is reflexivity? Reflexivity involves reflecting on your assumptions and your expectations, your choices, your actions, and you do those reflections throughout the entire study. And the purpose of those reflections is to recognize and be cognizant of the influence of who you are, of your position, in terms of the knowledge you are generating. All right? So because of the way we're doing research, because we're on that constructivist side of the house, who I am impacts the kind of insights and knowledge I'm going to develop. So Braun and Clarke tell us that there are 3 different moments or 3 different kinds of reflexivity we're going to engage in, okay? So first of all is personal reflexivity. This is about the personal aspects of who you are. This is about recognizing your social position. That will include, for example, your sex, your gender identification, social class, economic status, race, ethnicity, your urban versus rural experiences, levels of physical ability. The first thing you start off with is writing down some notes about that. And you're asking yourself, how do you occupy positions? Are these positions of privilege? Are they positions of marginality? What experiences and background shape your worldview with respect to the data set you have? What is your personal position in terms of the work that you're doing? That's your personal reflexivity. Second, then, you do some functional and disciplinary reflexivity. What on earth is that? This is about the scholarship, about how you were academically trained, your research training, your disciplinary home, the things that have shaped the way you think as a scholar. What you're going to be asking are questions like, what research training do I have? What do I think, quote unquote, good research is? What theories do I favor? What are some of the fears I have about this research that I'm doing? And again, you're asking yourself these questions in relation to the research question you're asking and the data set you have. So what you're doing then is that functional disciplinary reflexivity. This then means we have one more, and that's your topic reflexivity. Now, your topic reflexivity, we consider in terms of your personal and functional reflexivity, and we talk specifically about the topic we're studying. How does your personal life experience and your worldview influence your view on the topic of study, on your data? What assumptions do you have about the topic you're studying, and what are some of the expectations you hold, right? So we start with that personal reflexivity, we do the functional and disciplinary reflexivity, and then we do topic reflexivity. All of this is done before you even open up the data set, because what you're trying to do is make explicit, and you're going to write all this down somewhere, some of the ways in which who you are is shaping your thinking, all right? We're going to do this at several times during your analysis work, because who you are is shaping your interpretations, is shaping the knowledge. And again, the point is not to stop that influence. It's not to try to be unbiased. Instead, it's in an effort to be explicit and to let people know what your biases are, your perspectives, as I call them, because I think bias has a bad connotation to it. But what are your perspectives? How did that shape your knowledge? That will then help the reader say, that's aligned with the way I think about this topic. So this data, this knowledge that's being developed is something that can be useful to me. So let's say that you now have done your reflexivity. Congratulations, you've done your 3 kinds. It's time to actually get into the data. Now, reflexive thematic analysis has 6 different phases, all right? The first phase sits kind of on its own. It's the first one you'll do. What I want to let you know, though, is phase 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 can often happen iteratively, and you'll shift around in there. That don't think of them as a single sequence that you're going to go through once beginning to end. You're going to have to come back. You're going to have to circle, go back. You might be at phase 4. You're going to go back to 2. You have to recognize that these phases are phases that you will go through in process for sure. Like, I don't want you to think you're going to go from 2 to 5. You're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But when you get to 5, you might say, oh, I need to go back to 3, or I need to go back to 2, or whatever, because I'm starting to see things differently. So let's start with that first phase, the one that you really only do once, and that's called familiarize. This is when you read and reread the data to become deeply familiar with the data. And this is the work that every qualitative researcher does when you sit down with a data set and you just start reading, because you need to understand the perspectives present, the ideas that are present, and what are you starting to see? What have I got here? I'm just familiarizing myself with this data. The goal of this first phase is to write some notes about some of the analytical ideas and insights. Maybe you're already starting to think about a code or two. Just reading this, getting familiar, making notes about what you see as currently important. What's some of the work we have here? Let's jot down some notes and get yourself into that. One of the things that often happens, depending on the topic, when I do familiarization work, is I often have moments of, I can't believe the experiences of these people. So of course, as all of you know, I am not a clinician. So when I read your stories, and audience members, it's really your stories that I spend a lot of time reading. I often think how grateful I am that you do the work you do, because I could never do that. So for instance, I was recently reading some data from the ER, some observation work, and I found myself just so deeply appreciative of the work you all do. Because in that kind of chaos and that pace, and the things are changing and it's happening so fast, I don't think I have the skills to be successful in that space. That's one of my familiarization notes I might make. So this then gets us to phase 2. Phase 2 is called coding. What you're doing is closely and systematically reading the data. You're finding segments that are relevant to your research question, segments that are interesting, segments that are meaningful, and you start creating descriptions or statements that are what we will call codes. Now, remember, in coding, you're really just doing the identification of findings that speak to your research question. This is fine-grained work. It's line-by-line reading of the data to find excerpts that address your research question, and you give those codes labels and names. You probably should be writing down at this point some descriptions of what the codes mean. There is analysis involved, absolutely, but this is your first analytic interpretation. This is analysis of what you find relevant and important, and it's It's very close to the data. We're not doing deep analysis yet. You're quite close to the data. Remember, somebody else might identify other things, and that's okay. This is constructivist, big Q qualitative research. Now, if I could give you one tip, I would tell you this. One code captures one concept or one meaning unit. So after coding the entire data set, you're going to have a lot of codes, and that's okay. But now we have to get to the next level of work, and that's starting to bring those codes together. So what that means then is what you're doing is phase 3, generating initial themes. So here we are looking to identify shared meaning patterns across the data set. We're going to create clusters of codes that start to help you understand and answer your research question. So here, the work you're doing is you're taking all of the codes and you're trying to see if some of them share a core idea or a core concept, or if they speak to each other in important ways. How can I bring different codes together to have more explanatory power, be a little more abstract? You're interpreting farther away from the data. Again, let me give you a tip. What is a theme? Well, a theme has several codes. It has many different codes within it, which means it has a broader meaning, right? So if a code was a single meaning unit, a theme holds many or more meaning units. It can be as few as 2, but I've tied as many as 5, 6, 7 together. These are codes that you develop from the data excerpts. You read them, you bring them together, you start to create a broader analytical understanding, right? Your interpretation is getting farther away from the data now. So that's phase 3, which then takes us to phase 4. Phase 4 is develop and revise themes. This is the work you do to verify that the themes make sense in relation to the codes and the data extracted, as well as the full data set. This is one of the most important phases in this work. And this is why this work has to be so iterative, because sometimes you made your codes, you started to develop some themes. Now you're looking at your themes, you're reading large portions of the data set together. And this is when you have to push your thinking. Do these descriptions hold? Does this theme really reflect the complexity of the phenomenon I'm seeing? Often for me, what happens is that I'll get some themes built and I'll realize that, there's another code over here that I might have put in a different theme, but I actually think it's relevant here as well, or more relevant here than in the other. So now I have to modify my themes to bring this code into it, because when I take the themes and I look at the larger data set, I realize that I'm missing something, or maybe I've added something in that doesn't belong. This is one of the hardest parts of thematic analysis, because you have to look at the thinking you just engaged in and question it. Are these interpretations working? Are these interpretations apt? What have I missed? What else should I bring in? This is a point, word to the wise, when working with a team is so incredibly important, because often you need other perspectives to help you see your blind spots, the things that you're holding on to that maybe belong somewhere else. So this is a really great time to bring in expertise and experiences and start having those regular meetings with your research collaborators. Next, we get to phase 5, which is refine, define, and name your themes. So you might have started doing this earlier in the processes, but what you're really doing now at phase 5 is ensuring that each theme is built around a strong core concept. One of the things that I do often at this point is I sit back with my thematic structure and I ask, what does this theme tell me? How does this theme answer my research question? Now, this very much involves looking at one theme against the other, asking myself, what's the overall story of my manuscript or of the analysis? What am I seeing here? This is a really important moment, because when you get to phase 5, at some point, it should kick you back to an earlier phase of analysis in the data set to make you look at things differently. Remember, all of these phases are iterative, and the last one is phase 6, it's writing up. And this is when you weave together the analytical narrative with compelling data excerpts to answer your research question. You write your manuscript. And as we have learned so graciously from many authors, now I'm going to flag and a tip of the hat to Lorelei Lingard here, writing is thinking. And so often for me, when I'm writing my manuscripts, as I'm writing, I'm realizing that I've not quite got this right. So even when I'm in the writing phase of a manuscript, it'll often kick me back to an earlier phase of thematic analysis, requiring me to think back and reflect and be a little harder in my thinking. Those are the 6 phases of thematic analysis. As I said, highly iterative. And really, it's not that their 6 phases are really complicated, but the work that you're doing is deep thinking work. In qualitative research, I often feel that the bulk of the work of qualitative research is in the data analysis part, in the data, the collection and analysis of data, because it's often iterative, those two. In quantitative research, I often sort of shorthand think to myself that a lot of the work is done before you even collect data. It's developing the right tool and all that sort of work. So the thematic analysis for qual is a place in your timeline of your research project. You should be ready to spend some time in this. Make sure you block off enough time to do the hard, iterative, deep analytical thinking. Before I let you go, I want to give you a few pitfalls to avoid. So one thing that happens a lot, and we see this a lot in many of our manuscripts, is that people mistake codes for themes. So please, please, please ensure that you do sufficient analysis and sufficient interpretation. Remember, one code is one meaning unit. So if you look at your data and you list themes and it's just one relatively straightforward idea, what you're doing is writing codes, not themes. You need to push harder on that analysis. A second pitfall is to have too much overlap between themes. If your themes are really closely linked and have a lot of the same kind of data excerpts inside them, you need to stop and ask yourself if you should actually merge those 2 themes into one. It might be that there's still 2 themes, but you haven't articulated them well enough yet, that you need to be able to make sure you can describe why these need to be 2 different themes. So, and don't be afraid to combine them. Maybe they should be one. The last point, and this is really important to stress, there must be a clear connection between your data and your themes. So when you are doing your data analysis and when you're writing up your paper, make sure that you always can go back to the data and say, this is evident in our data set here, 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 and here, right? So make sure your data speaks clearly to your themes. So with that, my dear colleagues, I am going to wrap up our second methods consult on thematic analysis. We are going to leave a series of references in the show notes so that if you have additional questions, you can go there. I'll make sure that Braun and Clarke's book is there, but I'll also ensure that there's an Amy guide that's a bit of a shorter version of the key elements you need to know. We'll also put in an Amy guide in there about reflexivity if you need some more insights and tips about how to actually do that. Like what do I actually write down? Maybe you need some guidance on that. As always, we are always looking for your feedback, your insights, your reflections. So please feel free to reach out to us. You can find us at our website, thepaperspodcast.com. You'll find all the information you need there about getting in touch, and we would love to hear from you. And so with that, dear Papers people, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope this little methods consults makes your thematic analysis in the future just a little bit easier. And with that, I'll talk to you later.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Saro. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.